I've already cut 4 lengths of wood. This time I'm using 1x2s. In the past I've used 2x4s. I find that 18-inch lengths just a handy size, plus the hardware cloth that we're going to be using as the sifter comes in 2-foot widths, so the 18-inch length seems to work really well. We're just going to do butt joints all the way around like this to build the frame. I've already nailed 2 of the pieces together. I used screws on my 2x4s, but the screws I used are really too big for these little 1x2s, so I'm just using nails here. And since this is on the bed end to keep it square, this one's on top here, it's going to have to butt up here. The frame for the sieve is made up of 4 lengths, equal lengths of wood. This time I'm using 1x2s. I've used 2x4s in the past. Makes them a little bit bulky, so this is sort of an experiment to see how this works. I used screws to fasten the 2x4s together, but the screws I have are a little too big for these little 1x2s. So we're going to be using nails to put the frame together here. I'm just using butt joints. But you have to make sure that the length is on the outside here and on the inside here, so that all 4 sides are the same length. Otherwise you'll end up with something that isn't quite square. Alright, once you've built your frame, we're going to attach the hardware cloth. It's a wire mesh, 1/4-inch squares. It's sold as hardware cloth. This where I have it in my local hardware store, it's on 2-foot wide lengths, about 10 feet long. It's another reason why these 18 inches is nice, because the 2 feet then gives you some nice overlap. I just cut a length to make it square so that you have equal overlap on each side. I strongly recommend, I just used wire nippers to cut the mesh, but I strongly recommend anytime you're using hardware cloth to you wear gloves. The little cut wires scratch you up faster than a cat. So you're going to center your frame on the hardware cloth. Because it's a wire mesh, it's almost like a nice graph system, and it works really well. I'm just going to fold this edge up. Get an idea what it looks like. We're going to be using a staple gun to attach the mesh. A few staples in to hold it in place. Make sure it's staying on line. If your staples don't go in all the way, you can just set them with a hammer. Just going to use a few staples to hold it in place on the sides. We're actually going to be putting, you can use closed cell foam, or I'm using pool noodles to put along this edge, and that helps not only to hold the screen in place, but keeps these sharp edges covered so that when you're using the screen, you don't slice your hands up. So we only need a few staples to sort of establish where you want the screen to be. And the way I treat the corners, so I take wire snips and Cut along one corner. All right, I've cut the hardware cloth just along one side so that, whoops, apparently I didn't cut it all the way through. Cut it along one side so that when I turn this flap in, I can bend this one around and staple it in place. So it leaves a nice flush side. Again, all these points will be covered up by the closed cell foam or pool noodles. So this just needs a staple to hold it in place while you work. We have our assembled frame. We've stapled the hardware cloth around the edges of the frame. So this is the bottom where we're going to be putting our substrate, our matrix, to sift out and hopefully find some good specimens. And in order to ensure that this thing floats well and to protect the user from these sharp edges, we're going to cover these tops with closed cell foam. Pool noodles. You can use a box knife, a razor knife to cut lengths. And then just cut a slit. All the way through. Slide that over the top. Come on. Working with it to sort of drive it down all the way because it catches on the mesh. Alright. And then we're going to secure the noodle to the frame with zip ties. Now these are, I don't know how I lived without these zip ties. They're a relatively recent invention. They're cable ties meant to keep computer cables neat, and of course growing up when I was a kid you didn't need to keep computer cables neat. But I found 101 uses for them outside the realm of keeping cables neat. I'm just going to be threading through the screen mesh around the frame and around the noodle. I just configured it so that the loose end is going to be pointing down, so when you're operating it using the sifter out on the river, you're not getting poked by the little pieces sticking up. So this part's actually going to be pointing down into the water. Alright, here's our sifter with our floaties. And when you're working in the river and this thing is floating, rather than having to hold on to it the whole time, we're going to put a lanyard on. I have about a 9-foot length of rope. This is mostly polyester, so what I did when you go to cut it, if you wrap a piece of tape where you want to cut, and then you cut, and then you burn the end so it gets all melted, and that keeps it from unraveling. So we melted both ends. And what I'm going to do is just run through one of our cable ties here. And just tie it in place. We use a bowline to secure it. It doesn't really matter what knot you use. I like these because you can untie them if you need to. Right. And then when you're out on the river, you can tie the other end to a belt loop or just around your waist. Then you have your hands free and your little floaty sieve follows you around wherever you go like a well-trained dog.